We're quite fortunate to have really one of the foremost experts, not in Louisiana, not in the Southeast, not in the United States, but really in the world. And one of the things I think that is so special about Dr. O'Neill is that she's a Cajun girl who was born in Monroe, Louisiana. And it goes to show you when a person has the right attitude, character, and commitment, what they can accomplish, because she's on panels all over this country, was very influential in the NCAA COVID protocol panel last year that actually led to being able to have a football season. And some of the coaches who we know in college athletics say that without her, it would have probably never happened. So having said that, Dr. O'Neill, we turn it over to you, and thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, everybody. I really appreciate it. I was passing through yesterday. We went to see our kids because they're with their grandparents right now. My husband's a critical care doctor, so obviously we're working some long days, and the kids would rather be at their grandparents anyway. So we passed all the way from DeRidder back into Baton Rouge, and we were going through the outside of Eunice on 190, and they were cutting rice. And I told my husband, maybe we should just stop and go cut rice with these people. And I would much rather be in a combine today than headed back to the hospital. And I know that many of you are from small towns and from Cajun country. And I really do. I hope and pray every day for all the people that I grew up with, and all the people that hopefully are getting information like you are, and that you can share today as we go through this, because this is a tough choice. It's a choice that's made a lot of people wring their hands, and I just want to be able to give you information to help you make a choice for yourself and for your family. I'm going to share my screen and let's get started. Let's see. So obviously we're here today to talk about COVID and also the COVID vaccine, but I'm going to start with just a little bit of background on where we are. This is the latest heat map of kind of hot spots where we're seeing higher transmission. And this transmission started in the South in the last couple of weeks, but really has blossomed through many areas of the country as the Delta variant continues to make its way through communities that are either under-vaccinated or not having enough mitigation, or a combination of the two. But definitely the South as a hotspot. You really can't go anywhere right now in Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi without having a high risk of getting COVID-19 yourself or being exposed. When you look at vaccines, there are two kinds that you have the option to get, and let's talk about both of those kinds today. The mRNA vaccines are your Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and they're super, super interesting. This mRNA technology has been around since the early 80s, trying to get a cleaner vaccine than our previous vaccines, trying to find vaccines that were very efficacious, meaning they work super well, but also didn't come with as many side effects. Our other vaccines, and we'll talk about the J&J, they tend to have a lot more to the vaccine that gets put into your arm. And so they tend to have associated side effects that the mRNA vaccines were really trying to steer away from. So how does it work? This is one COVID virus. They take the spike protein, which is that end of the virus. We'll look at a better picture of it later. And then they just take a piece of mRNA from the spike protein. So you're talking about a very, very small piece of a very, very small piece on the outside of the virus. They take that mRNA sequence, they put several of them in a lipid coating. The lipid coating is innocuous. It's stuff that you eat and have in your food products all the time. And then they put it in a shot and they put it in your arm. The vaccine's gone within hours. Your body takes it in, chews it up. None of those products are there within hours, except the mRNA is in your cell. And so what happens when things that are not you get inside a cell is your body says, this is new. I don't like this at all. It's no different than if you stuck a stapler in your hand and over time you start to have that reaction that pushes that staple back out. It's the same thing. Your body says, I don't like this. I've never seen it before and I need to have an immune response against it. And what it does with that immune response is, have you ever seen or played a practical joke on somebody where you have a piece of information and you want to get it out to everybody really quickly, so you make a lot of copies, right? Probably going to go put it on the bathroom door so everybody can see it. Your body does the same thing. It makes a lot of copies, and it's copying that template of the spike protein. It's not copying the virus. You don't keep it in your body, but it's sounding the alert. And that's been one of the big things that I've seen misrepresented on the internet is you have lots of spike protein in your blood. Where could it go? Could it stay forever? Those are just the copies made to tell your body, hey, I saw this thing. We don't like it. Please remember that this is not something we like again, right? And though that message gets sent out over the next week or so. So really telling your body, hey, you need to remember this. And then once that happens, it all kind of dies down. Your body's ready. You've had a practice run, but if it doesn't get used again, you just store that knowledge away for a while. If you look to this side of the graph, when you look at how effective these vaccines are, they're one of the most effective vaccines we've ever made, despite what you've heard in the news over the last couple of days with breakthrough cases. When you get a vaccine that's greater than 90% effective in preventing serious illness and hospitalization, and you compare it to previous vaccines that you've had, really this is one of the best things we've ever done. Now, MMR vaccine, I would say, is probably one of the best vaccines you've ever received. So it's in the 80s to 90s against all of the components, measles, mumps, and rubella. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen a person with measles, mumps, and rubella, but if you have, it's rare, and it's because they came from an unvaccinated community. So occasionally we'll see it in college because we have somebody from Europe or California who comes into LSU and comes from an unvaccinated community. But otherwise, we don't see these diseases anymore. Now, that's for two reasons. One, because the vaccine works so well. Two, because everybody gets it. And so what we saw with the LSU tennis team a couple of years ago, made the news, was we had a couple of kids from an unvaccinated community who brought mumps into the tennis team. And then we had vaccinated kids who got mumps, a milder form, but that is a breakthrough infection. So taking what we've seen before and applying it to today, we know that unless we get everybody vaccinated against something, we do see breakthrough infections. When we get everybody vaccinated, we really don't see it anymore. And that's what we're trying to achieve with COVID-19. Compared to the flu vaccination, this is just a huge win. Flu vaccine is only 40 to 60% effective. Even this weekend, hearing that these mRNA vaccines may be effective only into the 80 percentiles, we're still winning versus the flu every day of the week. Let me see if I can advance my slide. So let's talk about the J&J vaccine. And this is also kind of how the AstraZeneca vaccine works too. These are adenovirus vaccines. Again, taking a very, very tiny piece of that spike protein and just a piece of the RNA from the spike protein, but it is wrapped up in a coating of adenovirus. Adenovirus is a cold virus. Almost all of you have had adenovirus before at some point in your lifetime, maybe even multiple times. Very common cold virus. They wrap it in the adenovirus to irritate your body more, to say, hey, you really need to come and look at this so that you have a really good immune response to it, because they planned for one shot. And so they want your body to see that, to replicate it and copy it out. They want you to be really angry, so you make lots of copies to say, you need to remember this vaccine. In doing that, it causes a little bit of a different type of inflammation. And so that's why we have seen different side effects from the J&J than from the mRNA vaccines. Overall, both work really, really well, but definitely different types of vaccines. So how well do they work? I've given this data many, many times and actually pulled it out again recently because we've had so many people who have been exposed to COVID after their first shot, as people start to get more vaccinated lately, but haven't gotten their second shot yet. So this is day 0 for the Pfizer and Moderna studies. You'll see them side to side right here. Day 0, they gave vaccination to some people and they let people have a placebo, meaning they just got nothing in their arm, and followed them. And because it takes a while to make those copies and to tell your body, hey, I'm making an immune response, they saw that people right after day 0 did continue to get COVID. And then in that vaccinated group, which is the red line here, somewhere around day 10, they had enough antibodies that they started protecting themselves against COVID-19, whereas the group that did not have antibodies and were not vaccinated continued to get COVID-19. So we started to really see the effect of the vaccine happen at about day 10, not fully vaccinated until 2 weeks after your first shot, just because that's when you really saw the massive split. And you saw that in both studies. What's the second shot for then? Because this doesn't show that second shot effect. The second shot is just your second scout team. You know, would I rather have a vaccine that comes in, teaches me what to do, and then never comes back? What we know is that the first time that you ever receive a vaccine, it's always better to remind your body just a few weeks later, like, hey, you might see this again. that's what spurs long-term immunity, is you coming in again and saying, hey, let's practice one more time. So we do that with tetanus. We do that with MMR. We do that with the first time your child gets a flu shot, they actually get 2. All this happens really early on in life, so we sort of forget that we usually get a booster, but most vaccines require a booster when you're first learning, because that extra practice helps you develop long-term immunity. After you get the vaccine, you'll probably have some side effects. Depending on how old you are, the greater than 55-year-old age group has very little side effects. The younger than 55-year-old age group, you practice hard and you have some side effects from it. So let's go through those because they're expected. I'm glad about them. It means you have immunity, but let's talk about what you should expect. So when we look at side effects that happen after the first dose versus side effects that happen after the second, almost everybody felt pain at their injection site. Honestly, it's the smallest needle we've ever used. It's a really tiny needle for this vaccine because it's so little of it in there. But yes, you get a needle in your arm. So people did say that they felt that pain. After the first dose, fatigue and headache, just feeling kind of tired, is a common side effect for about a day. Myalgia, so muscle aches, and then chills and fever, much less common after the first dose. And remember, some of these people after the first dose, they had actually had COVID before. So this is technically their first booster shot. And those are the people most likely to have those initial symptoms. Swelling at the arm, we did see a couple of people have that local swelling, and then joint pain and nausea. Still very low numbers overall, but it, you have to look out for that and know that it might happen. Second dose is a practice. So I liken this second dose to a hard workout. You haven't been working out a whole lot. Next thing you know, you decide to go running or go biking hard, or you just have a really long day with your family and you're sore the next day. That's what the second dose makes you feel like. It makes you feel like you had a hard workout. Advil and Tylenol are great. I absolutely recommend taking alternating Tylenol and Advil after you receive the vaccine for 24 hours, because you likely will be working your immune system out and you will feel some side effects from that. And that's good. I never get irritated with my body for having a little bit of soreness when I get out of bed after I work out, and you shouldn't be irritated about these symptoms. It means your immune system works really well and has been fully prepared to see COVID-19 at some point again. So that's the vaccine. And I'll tell you, I thought it was a modern miracle, and I still do. But now we have the Delta variant, and it's causing havoc, but it's also making people question the vaccine. So let's talk about why that is, and why the Delta variant has sort of had to make us reconsider, at least in the news, what the vaccine means to our community. So Delta is different in a couple of ways. These are those spike proteins, and for all of you who actually can fix your own stuff, right? My husband is a great fixer of all things. His dad's a mechanic. So people who actually use their hands all the time and can fix your own things, you know that a hinged tool is very, very beneficial. So when you have a tool that has a hinge, you're able to get into places that you wouldn't have with a straight tool with no hinge, right? So what makes Delta different is that these spike proteins have 4 mutations that make them hinge in different ways. So not only do they stick straight up, they don't stay that way. They move, and they move all the way back. It's like passing by a cat and thinking that you're not going to get a little bit of hair on you. The Delta variant hinges so well, and it's so floppy with its spike proteins that they're attaching to people's cells faster. So you may have passed by in the grocery store somebody who had COVID, or maybe even had supper with somebody who had COVID-19 a year ago and said, hey, I didn't get infected. That must be my awesome immune system. But in fact, that variant last year was a rigid spike protein. So you could have inhaled it and then inhaled it right back out, and it didn't stay with you, or exhaled it back out. With this hinge, it is much more likely to latch on while it's inside your nose and then get into your cell really fast. Once it's in your cell, it shuts off your immune system. So it's like a protective blanket, some sort of invisible screen. It shuts off your immune system, it hides, and it starts to replicate really quickly. So even if you're vaccinated and you've been vaccinated with 2 shots, when this Delta variant gets in your nose, instead of your scout team saying, hey, something's here, I need to go get it, I've seen this before, for about a day, nobody sees it. and it's replicating. By the time your immune system sees Delta variant, it's already been multiplying in your body. And that's one of the biggest reasons why we're seeing more breakthrough infections is your immune system, once it knows it's there after that first day, it hurries up and takes care of it, but you may have mild symptoms. And then that multiplication time is faster. So all of that results in last year, if you were exposed to somebody with COVID, it took about 5 to 6 days before you had symptoms. This year with Delta variant, people are starting to have symptoms within 2 days of seeing somebody who had COVID-19, which is crazy. It's just rolling through the community really quickly because of all those things we just talked about. It's able to infect before your immune system comes. So even in the best vaccinated person, you might actually have a snotty nose or a little bit of headache, and then your immune system comes, wipes it out, and you feel better than the unvaccinated who got it, but you still had a few more symptoms. We talked about faster time to symptoms. We're seeing more breakthroughs because of this. It's still incredibly effective against hospitalization. I can't say this enough. The people who are our age and are working and contributing to this community, we are not seeing those people with breakthrough cases in the hospital. My breakthrough cases in the hospital are very sick people, very old people. I opened a chart this weekend and said, oh, I wonder why they have a breakthrough case, 94 years old. Oh, well, that's why, because their immune system just doesn't work very well, and their vaccination was never going to hold them through. They don't make good immune cells at 94 years old. But under 50, nobody's vaccinated. This is just, you have a good immune system. If you had had the vaccine, it would work for you. So other things about the Delta variant that have come out in the last couple of days that really make me nauseated. It looks like it's slightly more deadly. So deadly is on this axis, contagious is on this axis, and this is the Delta variant compared to all the other stuff we already know about, right? So this is last year's COVID-19. Delta variant is more contagious. It's infecting, like we said, 5 to 10 more people when you have a positive case versus last year's that infected about 3. It's also just slightly more fatal. I don't know how I did that. Not as fatal as the 1918 Spanish flu because we do have some medications that help work and we're overall a healthier population. Far less fatal than Ebola and MERS and smallpox, but more fatal than chickenpox for sure, and about as contagious. And for those of you whose mothers used to make you go to chickenpox parties, most kids got it. It's that contagious and that spreadable amongst our groups of people. So Delta variant's taken over, same reason. So this is the Delta variant, this orange, and it's taken over like wildfire. This is weeks of United States surveillance because it's so contagious. It's just beat out everything else. And in Louisiana, that same process that happened has caused this just really quick slope of up cases this last couple of days, last week or so, instead of this kind of slow slope that we saw with previous surges. And it's just because it multiplies so quickly. What we're seeing in the hospital, I'm really glad LDH started posting this on their website. So we don't do everything great in Louisiana, and I can't say that we've always funded public health for our own people very well. But one thing we did really have right before this pandemic started was a great vaccine database. And we have a better one than most states. So we are able to, all of a sudden, just last week, they said, we can marry all the people who've had vaccinations with all the people who've had COVID and give you what our breakthrough case rate is in people who are vaccinated. And so this is hospitalizations and death, but this is just all comers. So you've probably known somebody who's a breakthrough case and they're included in this number here. And so overall, still, the vast majority of vaccinated people are super, super protected, even though you're hearing about breakthrough cases. It's the unvaccinated that are still getting sick from COVID-19 at higher rates. Somebody asked a question earlier, and I wanted to address it about, are we seeing this same number in places that had better vaccination rates? So the South, by far, these are vaccination rates, so the lighter you are, the less vaccinated. The South started this for sure because we had less vaccinated people. And so the Delta variant was just able to spread more quickly in our population. But it has progressed to states that were better vaccinated than us. Now, I have a good friend who practices critical care in Seattle, and what she's describing is, sure, we have cases, they're in the orange, but they're not in the hospital because we're so fully vaccinated. So she said our hospital's not surging. We haven't seen anybody but elderly people, people with end-stage renal disease, people receiving chemo. Those are the breakthrough cases that come into the hospital. But she said, honestly, we're hearing about parties causing COVID outbreaks. They're not that sick. so they're not coming in. And I think that's the big difference between a very highly vaccinated state and a low vaccinated state. Obviously, like New Orleans, Seattle was the epicenter of the initial pandemic, so they've reached out for the vaccine more than we have. I wanted to share this with you because when I saw this study, it disturbed me, but it also made sense to me. So Delta variant spreads a lot. My kids have sneezed on me more times than I want to admit. And kids are just, they're virus spreaders. And so are adults to some degree. So you pass by people and they're sneezing or they're coughing and they try to cover their cough, but they can't. These are viral loads. When you look at the viral load, it's kind of like those pictures of Pigpen. Pigpen always had a cloud around him, or pictures of people who sneeze and you just see all that stuff coming out of their face. When you look at CT values and you go down, that means higher viral load. So the lower you are, the higher the viral load. This is last year's virus. So these are the viral loads in people who had last year's COVID-19. And we thought they were very high and that this virus was incredibly infectious. This is Delta variant. And so you can see the vast majority of people with Delta variant have lower viral loads or higher viral loads, lower CT values than anything we saw last year. Just a few have higher ones. And that just tells you again how infectious this is. People are breathing and spewing out tons of virus when they are infected with Delta variant. It's 1,000 times higher viral load, which is just enormous. We talked a little bit about the NCAA. I was able to get on a panel that discussed how we were going to prevent a North Carolina State event from happening again on the week after the College World Series. And when you look at the viral loads of young people who have this virus, the Omaha Department of Health said they had never seen viral loads that high. They were shocked at how much virus was spread in those cases. And so at that time, it was new to us. We had no idea this is what was about to happen, but it should have been very telling then. And that's what we saw a couple of weeks later. It's just a very highly contagious strain. So what happens with Delta versus Alpha? So last year's strain versus Delta variant. These are people who received one dose of vaccination, one dose against Alpha, because in Europe they did that a lot, or one dose against Delta. And what you can see is for the Pfizer vaccine, if you only received one dose of vaccine against Delta, you have about a 40% vaccine efficacy, meaning that it works, but you may have breakthrough cases because it doesn't work well enough to keep you from being snotty, but still a 90% efficacy against hospitalization. And that's with one dose of vaccine. And that's why I'm showing you this chart, because even if you can't complete your vaccine series for a month, getting a dose will prevent you from getting sick and being hospitalized, and does actually still offer protection against a breakthrough case, but not the 100% that we want, because we really need both doses. This is the same thing. So what's your protection for the Pfizer vaccine? In countries that have already given a lot more of it than we have and are seeing Delta earlier than we have. And so the gray is the last year's virus, and the red or orange is Delta. And what you can see is that, yes, they lost some protection when you look at Delta variant, but still we talked about when vaccines are efficacious and how efficacious are they, and the flu vaccine being 40 to 60%. So even in Israel with a ton of surveillance, they're still seeing really good protection against hospitalization, really good protection, the highest flu shot we've ever had against symptomatic disease, and then confirmed infection. What is confirmed infection? Just because I think you see this a lot if you're reading the news or on social media, and it confuses people. This is how we detect our athletes' infections. So we do a lot of asymptomatic surveillance. We're just swabbing all the time to keep an infected athlete from infecting the rest of the team. So when you see confirmed infection but no symptoms, that's asymptomatic surveillance. That's just a surveillance program where we're always looking for the virus in somebody's nose. If they're vaccinated, they may come and chew that up before they ever knew they were sick. And so that's great. That's exactly what we want, but counts as a case. And so I think that's a little bit misleading, because then people say, well, you see, it didn't work. Well, I never knew I had it. And the only reason I was in a surveillance program was to protect everybody else. And you found it in my nose. Every other disease we've ever had, we never looked. I don't know how many confirmed infections there are of measles, mumps, and rubella in college campuses every day, because it doesn't bubble up to illness. I don't know how many breakthrough infections we have that we never detect, because we've never done this before and just looked for virus in people's noses all the time. But again, when it matters the most. It doesn't make people sick if they get the vaccine. One of the other reasons that, one of the reasons that my husband got vaccinated, so it could be because he had COVID-19, and our first conversation was, hey, everybody wants this vaccine. There's not enough. Why should I get vaccinated? I already had it. There's a lot of benefits that vaccination has for other people, not just for yourself. So this is a look at Delta in Europe, again, because they saw Delta before us. They looked at people who had cases in their house and then people who had breakthrough cases in their house. So people not vaccinated, test positive, how many people did they spread it to in their household? And so a person who had never been vaccinated, who tested positive, spread it to about 10% of the people in their household. People who had been vaccinated but were a breakthrough case, and these people had only been vaccinated with one shot, spread it to 5.7% of their household. So we saw almost a 50% decrease in how many people they spread it to just by getting a shot of the vaccine. So yes, the vaccine keeps you alive and safe. Maybe you were going to be alive and safe anyway because you're a fairly healthy person. It also keeps you from spreading it to as many people. And that's why vaccination is a team sport. It's a group decision. You're not just protecting yourself. Maybe we're always going to be fine. You've got to protect everybody around you to slow down the spread. And we do see that vaccination does that. Switch gears a little bit and talk about side effects from vaccination. A lot of you submitted questions talking about being nervous for kids or not knowing because we hear about these side effects from vaccines. So we'll talk about myocarditis real quick. Myocarditis is very interesting to an infectious disease doctor. It's a horrific thing as a parent. Myocarditis is also fairly rare. I've seen several cases of it, but it's my specialty. If you said, hey, Katie, there's a patient with myocarditis to go see in the hospital today, I would tell you that automatically I would think it was a boy and somewhere in their college age years, because most cases of myocarditis, this is pre-pandemic. When we see it in the very, very young, less than 1 year old, and then it drops significantly. You don't see myocarditis in that kind of teen age group, but as they get to their older teens and then into their 20s here, you see myocarditis go up, mostly in males, some in females, and then it drops off again, and for the rest of your life, you have a low risk. Why is that? There's a combination of puberty and immune system and everything else that happens at that age, which is a crazy age, that makes you susceptible to developing myocarditis if you get a new virus. And the myocarditis cases that I've seen have almost always been because of adenovirus, which is a very, very inflammatory virus. A kid who'd never seen that virus for some reason before gets it new when they're 18 years old and gets really bad myocarditis. And I've seen kids go on to develop myocarditis that needed heart transplant from viruses. So have I ever seen a myocarditis case from a vaccine? No, because it's incredibly rare. We see them from viruses. It's also rare to get vaccinations at this age. Most vaccinations are done in this age group where we accept vaccines so much more easily from an immune system standpoint. So now we know that the vaccine for COVID can cause myocarditis. We also know that COVID-19 causes myocarditis. So when we look at the data of what your chances are of getting it from either, we see that in this age group, this 18 to 24-year age group, and you can look at the 12 to 17 too, we have detected some myocarditis in women, and we have detected some myocarditis in men. So out of 4 million men age 18 to 24 who received vaccination, 219 developed myocarditis. That really gets every parent freaked out. Oh my gosh, it's red, and that's a lot of people. Actually, more 18 to 24-year-olds died last week in a car accident out of 4 million than got myocarditis from the vaccination over the last several months. But it's still a scary number. So to put that into perspective, it's 0.005% of kids that age got myocarditis from vaccination. Now, remember, vaccination is a very, very small piece of spike protein, and it's actually just a tiny, tiny bit of that mRNA from that small piece of spike protein. When you get COVID-19, you get all the spike protein, and you get millions of copies of it. You are inundated with it the minute that you breathe it in. And so by and large, whatever you get from the vaccine, you should see more of in the native infection, because you're getting the same thing, just tons more copies, and your immune system may not be able to keep up. So the Big Ten did a great study. I don't like the Big Ten because I like the SEC, but they did a phenomenal study last year of all of their athletes. If you got COVID, they MRI'd you and they looked at your clinical symptoms. They would not let you go back to playing unless you could be cleared from myocarditis. And what they saw was that over 2% of their athletes actually had myocarditis on MRI. 0.56% of them had clinical myocarditis. They had chest pain or some sort of other symptom. You were 100 times more likely to get myocarditis from the infection than you were to get it from the vaccine. And that makes sense. Do you want to have a controlled response where you make copies and tell everybody ahead of time, I might see this again one day, or do you want to be inundated and have to make up your response as you're sick? And the answer is always, and always has been, that's why we vaccinate kids, I would rather practice first. It's just controlled. And yes, there are some side effects, but they are far less than if I actually allow this age group to get COVID-19. Same thing with J&J. We've seen some blood clots in women in their 20s to 30s, and that's been concerning. The chance is 1 in 1 million people will develop a blood clot after vaccination. Even in the youngest age group that we think do fine with COVID-19, 5 out of every 100,000 are hospitalized. So again, we take these side effects and we get really worried about them, but we don't talk enough about how many people we're actually seeing with side effects from the disease itself. We've got some questions about Guillain-Barre because that's come up as a vaccine-related side effect lately. We've been monitoring Guillain-Barre after vaccination, and we have seen some Guillain-Barre after vaccination. The rate per million is higher in J&J than it is for Pfizer and Moderna. I will tell you that we admitted a Guillain-Barre last week after COVID-19 infection, and we admitted a patient with Guillain-Barre in June after COVID-19 infection. So that's 2 in Baton Rouge in a 30-day period of time, both from the infection, not from the vaccine. So overall, again, we see Guillain-Barre. It's a terrible illness, but it's going to occur more with your infection than it will from vaccination. And you have to decide which one would I risk having. If you've had COVID-19 before, and this vaccination is really to help you boost your immune system, these side effects aren't usually seen on second administration. All of this stuff happens the first time you see a virus, not once you've seen a virus multiple times. So a couple of other myths that I've heard a lot about or heard people say. So the vaccine's too new. It came too fast. I want to wait for better data. The vaccines, it's just not new. I don't know where that terminology comes from. We've been studying these types of vaccines since the 80s. Why didn't we have them before? If I told you that, there's some better machinery that can make your tool. I'm looking for a spare part for an engine, and I can retool it really easily. All you have to do is change out all the machinery on your machinist floor. And when you do, you'll be able to make this tool much faster and easier. Would you do it? Be $250,000, $750,000 to change out all your machinery? I have no idea. It would be expensive. All to get a faster product out that you hope somebody's going to really, really want. That is what the mRNA vaccine was. It was out there. It was ready. I had a patient who was going to get an mRNA vaccine prior to COVID for a cancer drug that they were using it for. But nobody was using it for vaccines because they would have had to strip all of their machinery out of their factories and put all new machinery in. And nobody wanted to spend the money. Vaccines just don't make that much money to people who sell them. And the only reason they did it is because the federal government helped pay for that transition and that turnaround of machinery. So they're not new. They're probably the biggest advancement I'll ever see in my lifetime in science. And they were just on time. They were right there. They are a miracle because we were so ready, but we were never going to transition to mRNA without somebody paying for it because it was just such an expensive transition for factories. What are the long-term side effects? What are the long-term side effects of COVID-19? Again, you're either going to get a very small controlled response from vaccination or a horribly uncontrolled response from infection. We've well documented long-term side effects from infection already, especially in the 20 to 30-year-old female age group. They are tired. They are not bouncing back to work. They have really odd tachycardic symptoms that make them unable to go back to working out. Those long-term side effects we're seeing a lot from the infection, and already we're just not seeing that from the vaccination. What do we see in 20 years? People who get lots of bad viruses when they're younger tend to be unhealthy as they're adults. And so I think that we'll see that COVID-19, again, the infection is just so much worse because it's the same thing but supersized. And what do you want to take the risk of? Fertility issues are weird. I don't know where this came from. It's so bizarre. We're a fertile country overall, a healthy country who lives a long time because we vaccinate, because we eat well, because we have good diets. When you go to countries that are less vaccinated than us and don't receive their childhood vaccines, they have fertility issues. So it's really bizarre that we would think now that a vaccine would cause a fertility issue. The most common cause of fertility issues or reproductive issues are either something wrong with the reproductive organs themselves, high fevers as a child, which cause men to have fertility issues, which are caused by viruses. And the only way we get those down is to inoculate you so that you don't have a high fever when you finally get infected. So mumps caused horrible infertility, but now that we have the MMR, we see that that doesn't happen anymore. And then diet issues. So the unhealthier you are, the more likely you are to have fertility issues. And again, if you have COVID-19, you lose your smell. My nephew, who is an elite football player, had a really hard time coming back for spring practice because he lost his smell and lost 30 pounds, and it didn't come back forever. Would you rather be healthier, which makes you fertile, or would you rather risk a horrible infection, which we know gives you fertility issues? I would encourage you all right now, because you're living where I'm living. It's not a good time. There's COVID everywhere. So I think that while we talked a lot about vaccination, going back to just talking about COVID-19, everybody's got it. If you have sinus issues right now, you probably have COVID-19. You need to be tested. It's time to go back to wearing our masks in large crowds and trying to avoid this for our families, and being very protective of the people around us, because some of them are more frail than we are. What kind of mask is the best mask for you? This is my son, and a homemade mask that my mom made him to go to school. It offers the least protection. It's like covering your cough. So if he has COVID, this is helpful if I'm sitting next to him, but it doesn't help him in terms of what he breathes in, because it's just a regular cloth mask. Regular surgical masks are really good protection. N95s are the best if you're actually interacting with the patient, but you can't keep them on for long. So we find that people who try to wear N95s all day long, if they're truly fit tested, they pull it off because you just can't breathe well over a long period of time. So I would recommend a medical mask or a good, well-fitting 2-layered cloth mask if you're going to go that way. So my goal, and we have some questions, my goal today was to talk to you about vaccination and to help you understand the likelihood of infection, and then you're less likely, and really you're less likely to transmit, which is how you'll contribute to your community in the end of this pandemic. Talk about masks a little bit. I do want to remind you of the isolation and quarantine rules, because many of you may have had somebody who's been infected lately or come into close contact. If you're infected, you isolate for 10 days. If you have to be in quarantine because you had a close contact, it's 8 to 10 days. 8 is the shortest if you can get a test to prove that you're negative. And then to ask you, what is your goal? What do you want out of all of this? Is it to leave the pandemic? Is it to keep yourself healthy? Is it to keep your family healthy? Is it to keep your workforce healthy? Whatever your goal is, that's how I approach everything. You tell me what the goal is, and I can come up with a way to get there. And almost everybody's goal in the end, we're probably not going to get there without vaccinating, unless you want to stay in your house and hide for a while. But you'll have to make that decision for yourself. And I hope that I've provided you some information to help to do that. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Do we have any questions?
Katie, this is Lenny. When you think about duration and how long this variant, may run before it begins to kind of, drop off in its impact, do we have any idea, what that might look like?
No, this is very disturbing to those of us in the hospital right now, but if you take what we saw before, it should start to drop off in the next couple of weeks if we all mask, and if we go down to decreasing volume in restaurants, and if we put a limit on large gatherings. So every other surge has come with those things, and that's what made it drop off. We've never vaccinated a lot in the middle of a surge, and so maybe we are seeing some increase in vaccination. It's not enough yet, but if everybody just went and got vaccinated today, would that stem the tide? It would take 2 more weeks, but it would. I think our biggest concern in healthcare right now is if nobody says anything about masks or decreasing volumes of social gatherings, this could go on for weeks. We've never had a surge where we didn't have those other things in place too to stem the tide.
How are you dealing with, if Lenny, if I have a non-COVID major healthcare issue and I've got to be rushed to the ER? Are you having capacity issues and competing kind of issues in managing your ERs?
Yeah, two ways. So depending on where you are, I'll talk from the MAMU perspective first, because that's the one that makes me the most worried. If you have a heart attack and you're in MAMU right now and you need a heart cath, which they don't do there, you need to go to another hospital, either Lafayette or Baton Rouge, sometimes Opelousas. Nobody's taking you. They won't accept you and transfer. They're doing it as favors, and they're watching for an empty bed, but you may sit in the ER for a day or two waiting, which is just ridiculous. We move those patients every day within an hour. If you have an abscess and we had a guy who needed a big facial abscess drained up near Monroe a couple weeks ago, and he sat for 4 days with that big facial abscess on antibiotics because they couldn't find an ear, nose, and throat specialist. They couldn't find a hospital to accept him for the ear, nose, and throat specialist. Our docs would see him, but there's no beds anywhere where they have specialists. So if you're out in a small region and you always rely on big hospitals for specialty care, none of the big hospitals are taking patients right now. If you walk into the ER of Our Lady of the Lake or the Baton Rouge General today, we're going to tell you if you're not that sick, it's going to be hours before you're seen, which is not our standard. If you have a tractor accident or an ATV accident today and you come in and your leg is maimed, we don't have a bed for you in our trauma unit. So you're going to stay in the ER possibly for a day or so. You'll get surgery and we'll take care of you, but it will be uncomfortable and you will say, God, this is a horrible experience. It's not the experience we want to give. It's just there's no beds to put anybody else in. We took a couple of wounded people yesterday. It was a busy Sunday for a trauma area, and they all stayed in the ER all day long, went to the OR, and then went back to the ER for a bed because we couldn't get them in.
Any other questions?
Somebody submitted a question. Vaccines are not FDA approved and therefore may not be good for you. I think that's a really good question. I wanted to address it if we have some time. So FDA approval is interesting. My husband recently, in the last 7 years, my husband's been working on a new test to identify who has sepsis very early, a really quick test. It's an amazing test. I think it works really, really well. We've been on this journey for 7 years working with this technology, and it's not FDA approved yet. About 3 years ago, they started meeting with the FDA, and the FDA said, this looks like an amazing test. You should totally do it. But we want you to do this, and we want you to do this, and we want you to submit this. And when you're finally done on doing all the things they want you to do, which is part of their process, they make you copy everything on paper and deliver it in an 18-wheeler in multiple copies so they can all read it on paper. It's crazy. Their process is long and drawn out and is on purpose because they never rush anything. It's maddening during a pandemic, and that is why they have an EUA process. So there are 2 approval processes in the FDA. There's an EUA that says, let's fast track it because it looks like all this is great, but we want to sign everything with blue ink. We want to make sure we go through all of our red tape. It's been approved with an EUA process, which means that it's been looked at and it's been considered safe. And the rest, this final approval that everybody's hinged on, that's the red tape part. The part that when you're at war, when you're fighting basically a biblical pandemic, you don't tolerate red tape. If they thought it was bad and they weren't going to approve it, they would have put that out there. So those of us who are familiar with the FDA process, we don't expect them to come up with this last minute way that they won't do it. This is just their maddening governmental way of getting through the process. If they rush it, everybody's going to say, you see, you skipped steps. So you're danged if you do, danged if you don't.
Dr. O'Neill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My name is Christine Davis. I am a test subject for the AstraZeneca virus in the United States. And I was wondering is my contagion at risk any worse or better than anybody else?
Thank you for asking that, Christine. Several people have reached out over the last weekend because they were part of the AstraZeneca trial. Thank you for being part of a trial. That's amazing. You probably got your vaccine some time ago now. Was it last fall?
Yes, yes.
Mhm. So AstraZeneca has been doing their own booster trials, and hopefully they'll contact you soon. They are looking at how to boost those people who got it so long ago, because it's probably about time for a booster. And so look out for them. What we've also seen with AstraZeneca is your level of immunity to keep you from being hospitalized and dying is still really, really good. Really good. So I would not go to sleep at night worried. But your level of being able to protect yourself from getting sinus infection from COVID-19 has dropped off a little bit. So you may want to put your mask on if you don't feel like getting sick and having to take 10 days off. You may want to protect yourself because everybody in our community has COVID right now, but you're still really, really well protected against the bad stuff. And so I would wait and let them reach out to you, because I think that that's coming really soon. I'm looking at other questions. Somebody said, I'm over 70. Why would I strain my immune system via vaccination to the point of death? We've heard people talk about death due to vaccination. We have not seen that. We haven't seen that. Now, I'll be very honest with you. When you are over 70, your risk of death every day is just so much higher than when you're 50. You have more medical problems. Your body is older. I don't know you, so maybe you're just at the epitome of health, but most people over 70 are closer to death than they were at 40. That's just odds. It is not a strain to get a vaccine. We give the shingles vaccine and we give flu shots every year to over 70 because it absolutely protects your life. It is a strain to get a virus that you've never had protection against. And it is horrible to watch somebody over 70 die in the ICU today of COVID, when we know that those who get the vaccine just don't die like that. I'll say this nicely. The information you're reading about people dying from the vaccine is false. We've vaccinated hundreds of thousands of people just in our own health system. We just haven't seen that. You may have said this already. I have kids 0 to 11. How likely are they to get Delta with school starting soon? Makes me really nervous. I have one child who has not been able to get vaccinated yet. He's 9. And what is his likelihood of getting Delta? It's right now, if he goes to a birthday party, it's likely. So we've sort of drawn back from those sorts of things. Our school system is likely to say that we have to wear masks. And I'm glad about that, because I think that they'll be enrolling 7 to 11-year-olds in clinical trials soon throughout the state, and we'll be able to vaccinate. I'm also less worried about him. I am worried about our kids, but when we looked at those graphs earlier, and how many times have your kids gotten a cold in that age group in the last 5 years? A lot. There are 2 reasons to vaccinate. Some of us have sicker kids, and they need this vaccine to protect themselves. Those kids are who we get COVID from. They go to school. My son still tries to share my cup with me sometimes because he forgets whose cup's who's on the table. They spread disease very easily. And so there's 2 reasons to vaccinate children. And that's why we do. We vaccinate them for the health of our kids and for that long-term health and fertility that we talked about with fevers. And then we vaccinate them because they are super spreaders in the community. We thought that wasn't the case last year, but with Delta, we're wrong. Kids are getting it and they're spreading it. So again, to go back to your question, I would mask your child for now. I would try to stem back from social activities until we get the surge under control. But at school, mask, distance, just what they do. School's been shown to be fairly safe. Most kids get COVID at a party. Let's see. If someone who is fully vaccinated catches COVID-19, and is their transmission rate to others as high as someone who's not? It's less. It's about 50% less. So if I'm a vaccinated person and I have an unvaccinated person here and we both get it at the hospital and then we go home, I'm going to spread it to less people. I'm going to get over it faster. My antibodies are going to come and kill my virus faster. And this unvaccinated person is going to spend 10 days just being highly infectious to the people that they're with. I've called a lot of our employees who are in their 20s who chose not to get vaccinated and told them that they had COVID over the last week. And most of them say things like, oh, I thought that was a cold, and so I've been working the last several days. You know, that you're well enough to come to work, well enough to spew a ton of COVID, and because you don't have antibodies, you're not decreasing your shedding. It's just far more healthier for your team to be vaccinated, even if you're a breakthrough, than it is to be unvaccinated. Would you rather one vaccine over the other? Would you recommend? I totally recommend Pfizer and Moderna to everybody. And the reason why is because we have the most experience with it. We vaccinated the most people with those two. And the mRNA vaccines are just so safe. I believe in J&J. I think if you want it, get it. I think you'll need a booster at some point. So if you're getting it because it's one shot, you'll probably need a booster at some point anyway and get a second. And I just have less experience with J&J, but please don't keep that from getting vaccinated with J&J. I think it is safe. Is the vaccine safe for people who have pre-existing conditions, such as which can reduce the immune system? Yes, it is. And there was some concern about immune stimulation early on that we just haven't seen at all. And in fact, our immune system issue patients are still the ones who are more likely to have breakthrough cases. So we know they need that extra help. It may not protect you as well as a person who doesn't have an immune system issue, but it's far more protection than not being vaccinated. And now all the concerns about stimulating the immune system they're not there. These people are healthier, vaccinated. How long should you wait to get vaccinated after you've had COVID? I would not wait after 90 days. For 90 days, you have decent immune response, but around the 60-day mark, I would start to schedule your vaccine. You need to get it and finish it before 90 days is up. And I think that's it. Any other questions that I missed? What is the best quarantine protocol if a fully vaccinated person is exposed? This is where, the questions are always the same, but the answers change as we know more. And if you're fully vaccinated and you came into close contact with a person with COVID-19, say they live in your house, you don't have to quarantine. You just have to test. So you can go to work. You can go to the grocery store and care for your loved one because you're vaccinated, and your breakthrough rate is lower, much lower. You should mask, and you should try to distance from other people because you may become a breakthrough case. So you should just be more responsible about your movement, but you're so less likely to get it that you can continue to be productive. Just back up a little bit, eat alone, keep your mask on, and then if you have symptoms, go ahead and get a test. I hope that helped. As you mentioned earlier, we could have inhaled the virus, then shed it back off, thus not becoming infected. Please explain how wearing a mask will help your body discharge other existing viruses, molds, airborne. Wearing a wet, snotty tissue would be safe. So we wear masks a lot in the healthcare environment. So we have good masks. There's some masks that are just too hot and it's terrible outside right now. I would recommend finding a breathable, dryable mask. And then when I'm in my office like this, I take it off so they don't become wet. But if you're having to wear it constantly, you really do need medical grade masks that we do wear for, 23 hours at a time in surgery that lasts forever. And it's hot and we don't see any health detriment because it's such a breathable mask. And that's the kind that I would recommend if you're having to wear it that often, so that you're safer and that it doesn't create all that moisture. Will a Delta vaccine be developed? If so, will the fully vaccinated person have to get the Delta vaccine? Would the unvaccinated person wait for the Delta vaccine? So the mRNA piece in Pfizer and Moderna does protect against Delta variant very much. This may be as good as it gets because Delta, it's that hinge and its ability to replicate before your immune system sees it. We may not be able to make a vaccine that sees that creates antibody that sees Delta if Delta's hiding. We may have found a variant that reduces vaccine efficacy, and we may have another variant if we don't all get vaccinated now and stop it, because the variants will find their way around our immune system, and the only way to stop them is to hurry up and get everybody vaccinated. So I'm afraid our variants are making vaccine technology much more challenging. I don't know that we currently have technology that can make you better against Delta. And I've not seen that at all. What are the symptoms for someone who has been fully vaccinated but maybe a breakthrough case? Almost all sinus congestion and headache. Eventually cough in some, but most of them are very mild sinus symptoms, which is so classic Louisiana. So look out for that and do not think it's your allergies or another cold. Totally go get tested. How would you respond to an appliance repairman who comes to your home and vaccinated and says they had COVID-19 already? I would ask them to wear a mask. And if you have to have them in your home, I would stay away from them, have them wear a mask, and I would keep everybody out of the room because your previous antibodies are protective. They're not protective enough. So if you want to give that comparison of efficacy of vaccination, previous antibodies against last year's virus are only about 30% effective. So just really not enough to protect you from being a breakthrough. What about the vaccine triggering Guillain-Barre? So back to those slides, we have had some of the Guillain-Barre from vaccination, and we've had a ton of Guillain-Barre from COVID. And so either way, if you're going to get Guillain-Barre from virus stimulation, would you rather have it from vaccination? Would you rather have the risk from vaccination, which is a very small amount that should give you a normal immune response, or will you take your chances with getting infected? Because we will see more Guillain-Barre from the infection than the vaccine. I would take my chances with a controlled immune response and hope that it doesn't work out. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was advised that you should get your vaccine. You wouldn't have to wear a mask. Now it's advised that you're vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask. Do you think the science is changing on the effectiveness of the vaccine? It's a combination of a couple of things that changed. When they put out that guidance, they didn't understand Delta and how it would permeate through our communities, but they also didn't expect how many communities would not be vaccinated at all. So little. And you just can't stand in a room with that much virus as a vaccinated person and think my vaccine's plexiglass around me. So that recommendation to drop your mask was a little bit premature for everybody, knowing that many of us vaccinated live our entire life amongst the unvaccinated. And if the unvaccinated start having a surge of infection, I don't have anything but a mask to protect me and hope that my antibodies come to play when I inhale it into my nose. Can they be fast enough to keep me from being a breakthrough? They're fast enough to keep me from dying, so I'm still better off vaccinated. But could I shed a little bit? With this kind of viral pressure amongst our unvaccinated, it's too much. So I think that the mask recommendation should have had caveats, but they try to have one message, and now we have one virus that got around it. Would you recommend getting the vaccine to someone who is pregnant or breastfeeding? Oh my goodness, yes. So I called this employee the other day who has a breakthrough case. Her kids gave it to her because she's got multiple kids and she's actually on maternity leave. So she's breastfeeding mother who's vaccinated. And I call her to tell her, hey, you have COVID. She kind of has a hiccup, like this is not good news. And I'm so upset. I hear her other kids in the background. And she said, are we going to be okay? And I said, oh my goodness, you're going to be so awesome. Because we have these tiny babies in the children's hospital who are intubated and not doing well with COVID-19, and they won't get vaccinated anytime soon, right? They're so small, we have no vaccine for them. But when you're a mom who's pregnant and you get the vaccine while pregnant, you pass your antibodies to your child, and they'll actually have those antibodies for weeks to months. That protects them. So the only way to protect your very newborn baby against COVID is to get the vaccine while you're pregnant. And it's such a help. So she was breastfeeding too, which means her antibodies were getting to her child. So I recommended put a mask on. But you're probably the safest you could possibly be as a breakthrough case for your baby, because you're giving your baby your own immune system. So much better off than being unvaccinated. And we do that in the flu all the time. We give flu shots during pregnancy because we know that being vaccinated during your pregnancy is the safest for your baby. Long story, but I think that's the most important thing. We had to crash C-section a couple of people last week who were pregnant and got COVID, and it's just it's a very unstable situation for the mother and the baby. It's not worth it. In regards to the stats you showed earlier, are they based on those officially dying from COVID? Or are they dying with COVID and being classified as dying with the virus? How are stats interpreted being classified? Thanks for asking that question. That's really interesting. Okay, so I was in a horrible car wreck in June, and we see car wrecks all the time. And we classify people as being involved in a car wreck and dying when they have a complication from their car wreck. So for years, way before COVID, if you have a car wreck and you're in the hospital, and you get out and you get an infection in your leg and you come back in and that infection kills you, you died from a car wreck. That has always been how the coroner wants us to report things. We have very strict rules in every state about attributing death to an event. And so that didn't change in COVID. Everybody just became more aware of it. We attribute flu death, even though you have a heart attack after the flu. You didn't die of a heart attack. You died, well, on your death certificate, the first one is flu and the second one is heart attack. And because the flu caused you to have a heart attack, and we have great evidence that the flu does that every year. It gives people heart attacks. So when you've seen that news about, was this a COVID death or was it just they were positive for COVID? COVID causes people to get sick and they have blood clots and strokes and heart attacks. And so what killed them, made their heart stop, was the blood clot, stroke, and heart attack. Why did they have it? Because they got COVID. And that's every single time. So we can't change how we report. We've been reporting like that for years. It's very standard and it helps us understand what we have to go after to prevent the death. What you have to go after is you make your roads safer and you make people wear seatbelts. And you have to go after the vaccination, and then people will die from less associated things. Y'all, I'm gonna have to go in a bit because I have a noon meeting. What's your stance on home tests? I've told a lot of people to go get home tests lately because it's just so hard to find a testing site. They work okay. If you've been a close contact and you have a cold now and your home test is negative, I would totally not go to a birthday party. They work okay. They're a good kind of first look. If they're positive, they're right. But if they're negative and you have symptoms, I would get another test or wait a few days and test again. Is it safe to have a group gathering of 15 to 25 people if everybody involved is fully vaccinated? Somebody's probably going to have COVID and possibly be a breakthrough case or have the likelihood. I would tell them if they have all not been close contacts and are fully vaccinated, then it's safe. But they have to do both. They can't have been around positive COVID lately, like we talked about, and then feel safe enough to go do that. Where did the virus come from? I have no idea. We'll all be reading about this in 10 years, and I know we'll find out, and I can't guess. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to our society, and I hope that we find out sooner than later, but I have a feeling that the pandemic will end before we know. Vaxxed friend had low-grade fever and sinus issues this weekend. He was tested yesterday and tested negative. What is the time period between exposure and when we would actually see a positive test? It's 2 days for unvaccinated. It looks like it's closer to 4 for vaccinated, so I would test again. Just to make sure. Should you get the vaccine after receiving IV infusion therapy? You should wait about 60 days. And I'm so sorry, but I am going to have to go. Any other burning questions? I know that you guys have a message for your employees too before we leave.
Dr. O'Neill, thank you so much.